Morning.
Morning, Robert. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's nice morning.
Well, we're hoping it's going to get a little bit better, but I suppose you could say it's quite poetic. It's like the clouds gathering for Whitehead at the moment with regards to what's being planned down the road here. We can see it coming out of the mist. It's been a landmark for so many years of Whitehead, and everybody knows it, and some people like it, but with what's happening, I don't know whether like is going to be a word to be used for it for much longer. What are your thoughts on what's being planned here?
As it is, not really something that I think is a benefit to the landscape, but there are obviously those that like it, and for commercial reasons. I mean, from our perspective, as part of the Green Party, we are not interested in anything that supports, props up or propagates any fossil fuel development, and as far as we can tell, and the research always seems to point towards the fact that this is a short-term financial gain, in opposition to the long-term scientific studies which show that we're moving away from fossil fuels. By 2030 we'll have 70% ultra-low carbon vehicles, electric vehicles, those sort of things, and we've got a developer here that seems to want to invest in petrol and sort of short-term gains for no long-term plan.
Anybody that knows me knows my thoughts on this. But for argument's sake, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a little bit. The developer's telling us that this is great for the local area.
Right.
I mean, we're going to be able to see these super 120,000 tonne tankers coming in, which they can't bring into Maydown or Belfast. So by bringing them in here, they're putting the jetty to use. They're going to get in at a lower cost. They've given us the reason that we should like it is that it's going to pass on the savings to the customer. Do you think that's a reasonable excuse to be doing this here?
I think personally it sounds like a sales pitch. It sounds like we're going to give you something that's going to benefit you, but actually when you get to the core of that, it's about generating income for that company. It's not a benefit to anybody but themselves. I mean, basically what they're saying is we're going to invest in some infrastructure to try and pass on pence worth of savings, while our stock holders and our shareholders and all the people at the top of the tree are earning millions and millions and millions. So no, I don't really agree with that. It's a bit of sugar coating on a bigger project. You mentioned there about the 120,000 tonne. Sorry, yes, 120,000 tonne ships that are coming in. I'm an engineer by background, and it's a very complicated process to try and work out the actual litrage of fuels that are in there because of their specific densities. But for example, if we were talking about petroleum, petrol-based products, in that 120,000 tonne ship, we'd be talking about 150 million litres of petrol. And if there was some sort of incident, accident or whatever, setting aside the actual health and safety risks of what would happen in that, and the risks of explosion and danger to human life, the danger to marine life is paramount as well. We're talking about dumping that into Belfast Harbour. It would affect everywhere from Carrick to Belfast to Bangor, and the clean-up efforts would be absolutely astronomical.
See, that you've mentioned something there which we haven't heard an awful lot of. We're trying to get everybody in Whitehead to understand the impact, but this is so much further reaching.
Yes, very, very further reaching.
Even the impact of the trucks that they're planning to have, and they told us themselves at a meeting, they're planning to have on average one truck every 4 minutes entering or leaving the site.
Yeah.
Now that continues today. There's the impact through Eden, Carrick, Ferguson, further afield. Diesel particles, pollutant, noise pollution, but then again, like you're saying, Belfast Lough, if that was to spill, Bangor could Bangor be affected by this?
It's very. So I'll start with the diesel fumes themselves, and I'll go on to the sort of the marine sort of impact. So in Belfast, the Green Party has just commissioned and finished their own study about diesel particulates and fuel particulates and how they affect people and where they're at. And Belfast is terrible, in terms of air quality. And what we're talking about is introducing more fuel to burn and more vehicles to burn that fuel in residential areas. So if we sort of take the environmental aspect out of it for a second, are people on this infrastructure, on this sort of route where there are going to be these vehicles every 4 minutes, are we prepared to allow our children to have respiratory diseases, asthma, and sort of all those sort of issues that are going to be affected by these fuel carrying vehicles going down there, and the fuel that they're putting into the system that's going to burn? Like I said earlier, by 2030 we're going to be looking at 70% ultra low carbon vehicles. So those sort of vehicles are not going to impact as adversely on the environment, and unless we're talking about introducing that fleet of vehicles now, which I'm not prepared to think the LCC would have, then I don't see how they could be arguing any benefits to the society. Now, on the marine impact, it is very, very hard to calculate the impact of a fuel in water, because it is impacted differently by the densities of the water that are there. But I'm sure that if the like of Mid and East Antrim forced the issue and made sure that we had an environmental impact assessment on this, that sort of information could be understood and could be fully understood as to what areas of natural biodiversity are going to be affected if there was an issue. Now, obviously, companies like this and developers like this, they tend to sort of piecemeal their arguments, and they tend to sort of get little pieces through planning and little pieces through development and get some funding from somewhere else. And in Northern Ireland, unfortunately, unlike Ireland and the rest of the UK, we have no environmental protection agency. So all those little individual pieces of arguments are taken up by individual pieces of council, of the NIEA, and the Department of Infrastructure as well. So there's lots and lots of little bits that are being looked at. But as far as I'm aware, and you could probably correct me on this, Mid and East Antrim are not going to push for this development to have an environmental impact assessment.
It's not that they're not going to push for it. They have stated in a letter that they don't need to have an EIA.
Right.
And do you think this is maybe based on the grounds that there isn't an EPA set up, or on the grounds that maybe it's been a bit of a lack of foresight?
I wouldn't like to comment on other people's reasons why they wouldn't do something, but certainly if Northern Ireland had an environmental protection agency, I'm not sure that this development would be sort of skating over the ice and just sort of get on with it, lads, don't worry about it.
one other last thing, if you don't mind.
No, you're grand.
We mentioned the ships coming in. Another thing a lot of people don't understand is they're actually planning to offload from this terminal onto smaller ships to take out to England, Scotland, Wales and to the Republic of Ireland. So it's not just going to be ships coming in and offloading for road transport, it's going to be ships being loaded onto and leaving as well. So with that in mind, do you think that's going to have some form of impact on the harbour seals that we see around here, the porpoises and the summer visitors of the dolphins, which we do see every year?
So sorry, I'm wiping the water off.
Okay, it's not the dress that days.
So it was something you had explained, and I certainly wasn't aware of that part of the developer's plan, that they'd be taking larger ships in and then offloading. And I think as a layman, I'm not a seafaring person. I do love the ocean myself, but I'm not somebody who goes out on boats and knows what's going on. But essentially, I think that's part of the problem, is as laymen, as people who are not involved with the fishing industry or being out in boats quite regularly, a lot of us drive on the road and we think that the sea works in a similar way, and it absolutely does not. There's a very narrow corridor, as I understand it, in Belfast Harbour that people are able to take ships up and down. And obviously if we're introducing ships coming in and then more ships going out and around, the sheer logistics of that are going to cause problems, specifically with tourism and people trying to come into that channel. In terms of the environmental impact, there are very significant scientific studies that show that marine animals are impacted by noise, and setting aside the fact that generally what happens on a ship gets thrown off a ship, so be that human effluent, be that any fuel, be that any spillages that they have or any accidents they have, they just dump it in the sea and say, well, sure, it'll be fine. So there's a lot more risk involved in that. But the scientific evidence seems to show that when we have high traffic routes, we lose a lot of the smaller biodiverse, fish, krill, shrimp, all those sort of things are dispersed. And then that impacts the larger marine mammals, and the marine mammals just sort of start disappearing because their food sources aren't there. So I am no a marine biologist, and I'm certainly no expert, but the scientific evidence seems to suggest that where we have higher traffic areas, we tend to create a barren patch for marine life. So any tourist coming here expecting to see bottlenose dolphins or the harbour seals, they're probably going to see much, much less of them.
One last question, not directly related to our own cause here, but sort of almost like cousins. The gas caverns in Isle of Magee, Clock and Point Oil Terminal here. What is happening to this wee stretch of our country and our coastline? Yeah,
it's really depressing, and I mean, I could start by saying it's a lack of an executive, but really it's been going on for a long time. I mean, like I said before, Northern Ireland doesn't have an environmental impact protection or an environmental protection agency. We just don't have that in place, and it seems like there are countries, there are parts of Northern Ireland that have marine protection zones, and this area does not. We're not quite sure why that is, because we do have the biodiversity in the sea to warrant a marine protection zone. We have areas of specific scientific interest which pinpoint specific animals and say, you know, they should be recognised, but those relate to a species or relate to a piece of land or a piece of shore. They don't encompass the whole thing. So I think what we're dealing with here is a real lack of overall leadership and governance, you know, from the very highest levels. We have for years and years in this country focused on the constitutional issues. The constitutional issues are talked about day in and day out, and really I would like to see, and I think people are starting to understand, the constitutional issues of Northern Ireland are not as important as the environmental issues in Northern Ireland. You know, we are a country that's got a landmass that's connected to the south. We have a sea that is connected to England and Scotland and Wales, and yet we still focus on, you know, whether my name is a particular derivative or your name is another, and it just seems to be nonsensical. So if we understand where that came from, it comes from that culture and where Northern Ireland has come from, but really we need to return to a point of our environmental roots. You know, we all grew up, we were all farmers here. You know, you go back generations, we're living off the land and off the sea, and for years we've lost focus on that. So maybe that's why government hasn't focused on the overall encompassing sort of umbrella issues.
Sort of message I'm getting from you, could be wrong, is we only get one, we should look after it. Is that what you're saying?
I think you're absolutely right. We've got one planet, and the message that we've got from all the scientists is, if we look at the Paris Accords, we've got less than 12 years, we've got 11 years to turn around this idea of catastrophic climate change, and basically after 12 years the risks of much more intense floods, storms, sea levels rising are just exponentially. You know, even if we stop, if we had a net change in carbon today, if we stop producing more carbon, it's still going to take us around 20 years to sort of level out. And the tipping point is this 2-degree figure. If we change our overall global climate by 2 degrees, the knock-on effects after that are going to affect generation and generation and generation. And yet in this country we're still arguing about the flags and what colour the curbs are painted.
Well, I think it's safe to say that this promotion of fossil fuels certainly isn't going to help matters.
No, certainly wouldn't support anything that was supporting investment in fossil fuels at this time, and certainly when you mentioned Stop Island McGee there as well, in a sense a very similar developer thinking that they can make a short-term return financially instead of a long-term gain. I would like to see developers coming out and saying, listen, we will invest in the community for the next 50 and 100 years by doing X, Y and Z. You know, these two developers are coming in here and talking about fossil fuels. Why don't we get a developer talking about an offshore wind farm here? You know, those sort of things would make a lot more sense, put a lot more money into the community and have a lot more of an impact on our communities going forward, rather than this short term, let's burn it now and worry about it later. So
thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you, Andy.